Hi everyone, Amores here. As promised, today we are diving into the custom Voodoo4 MXM card from SDZ-Mods.com. If you're not familiar with the MXM format, it's basically a compact PCI Express standard designed for laptops, used almost exclusively for discrete GPUs that have to meet strict power and size requirements. But when it comes to power, this is the list of our concerns today. The Voodoo4 draws less than 20 watts, so there is room left even for a Voodoo 5, if only someone could squeeze that beast into an MXM card. This Voodoo4 M4800 card comes in two variants, one for LVDS displays and another one for the newer standard called EDP. The LVDS model is currently installed in this Dell M4800, which has an MXM Type A slot, and we're taking it for another spin today. But that's not all. If you can design a Voodoo 4 MXM card from scratch, then creating a Voodoo 3 version should be a walk in the park, right? And yes, there is a Voodoo 3 MXM card too, but get this, someone did manage to pack a freaking Voodoo 5 5500 into an MXM card, and guess who? Yep, Daniel from SDZ Mods, of course. This time an MXM Type B card was needed, which is slightly larger and designed for 17-inch laptops like Dell M4800. Now let's go back to our Voodoo 4. So let's literally zoom in and see how this thing works. Right here we have the VSA-100 chip, an evolution of the Avenger architecture that powered the Voodoo 3 series, but improved and faster. Don't ask me why, but we can still find these VSA-100 chips online for about $27 a piece, and even cheaper if we go for a full tray. Sure, we could also salvage one from an actual Voodoo card, but considering how expensive these cards are now, that's basically like throwing money out of the window. Next up is the Texas Instruments XIO 2001 PCIe-to-PCI bridge chip. This acts as the interface between the PCIe bus and the VSA-100 chip that can work on AGP or PCI bus. Nothing fancy here, just a bridge chip doing its job. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Spartan-7 FPGA chip. This little guy is doing a ton of heavy lifting. It takes the output from the VSA-100 and makes all the necessary conversions, since the original signal isn't directly compatible with this specific Dell laptop configuration. The Voodoo 4 can actually output DVI signal, a standard which had just launched a year before the card itself in 1999. Still, DVI wasn't very practical at the time, so Voodoo 4 cards with DVI are quite rare, but they do exist, especially if we get our hands on a model made for Macs. However, there is a slight problem. All Voodoo cards have a bug when outputting a DVI signal. The image is shifted by 4 pixels, and the 1080p resolution isn't handled correctly at all. The FPGA fixes these issues, then passes the corrected DVI signal to a Realtek LCD flat panel controller, which turns it into a raw LVDS signal that finally goes into the LCD panel. For memory, we've got 64 megs of SDRAM running at 166 MHz. That's for 16 megabytes BGA chips. They may look modern, but they behave just like the classic SDRAM chips from back in the day. The EDP variant adds a small chip that converts the LVDS signal into EDP format for modern panels. And that's pretty much it for the main components. We'll skip over the smaller stuff like flash chips, capacitors, and all the power-related bits, so we can jump straight into some benchmarking. When the Voodoo 4 hit the scene in late 2000, AMD and Intel were racing to be the first to break the 1 GHz barrier. AMD won by launching their 1 GHz slot A CPU in March 6, 2000. This was just 2 days before Intel released their 1 GHz Copper Mine based Pentium 3. But those chips were around $1,000 at launch and most folks couldn't afford them. So regular systems were running more like around 500 MHz. At this speed, the Voodoo 4 was actually bottlenecked by the CPU, as this AnonTech graph clearly shows. However, when the Voodoo 4 was tested with a overclocked Pentium 3 at 1.1 GHz, it already showed no FPS improvement over the stock 1 GHz version. That's why I was curious to see how it performs on a modern setup, specifically on this Dell M4800 that has a 4th gen i7 3 GHz CPU. And it's not only the CPU, we also have a much faster RAM. So I ran the exact same benchmarks, Quake III at 640 by 480 in 32-bit and again at 1024 by 768. And guess what? The results were pretty much identical to what we saw back in October 2000. The newer CPU gave us a tiny boost, about 5 extra FPS at 640 by 480 and just 1 FPS more at 1024 by 768. Well, at least we can say we're still getting a truly authentic Voodoo 4 experience. One challenge when benchmarking on this Dell M4800 is that at the moment, the Voodoo 4 only outputs to the internal LCD panel. That means the only way to capture gameplay is by filming the screen directly. Not exactly ideal, I know. However, this 15-inch high-density Full HD display actually makes lower resolutions like 640 by 480 look very good, almost CRT-like, and the typical LCD scaling artifacts like blurring are almost unnoticeable. Now let's talk about the actual image quality. Well, some games simply look better when rendered with the Glide engine. One of those games is Unreal. While the difference isn't night and day, there are some small improvements here and there, most notably in fog rendering and texture filtering. Also, the VSA chip supports FSAA full scene anti-aliasing, which helps smooth out jagged edges, and it's all handled at the hardware level. While it does work on the Voodoo 4, to really take advantage of this feature, you'll want a Voodoo 5 5500, which not only has a second VSA-100 chip, but also double memory bandwidth. And this really makes the difference. In fact, FSAA was one of the Voodoo 5's main selling points. Now let's talk about palletized or paletted textures, a feature that older cards like the Voodoo 4 could handle, but modern GPUs no longer support. The last generation of graphics cards with support for this texture format was NVIDIA's FX series. Now, if you're wondering what these were, well, instead of storing full color textures, games used a limited palette to save memory and boost speed. In some cases, using 8-bit textures could actually enhance image quality. Driver, released in 1999, is mentioned as one of the games that benefits. Though after running some tests with a Voodoo 3, both in Direct 3D and Glide, I'd say the improvement is hard to pinpoint. More often, however, games saw a slight visual downgrade when using palletized textures. This is how the sky looks in Quake 2 with 8-bit textures, and this is how good it looks without them. We are still running on a 3DFX card, my trustworthy Voodoo 3 PCI. Anyway, activating palletized textures will bring a slight performance boost, around 5% on this configuration. The Voodoo 4 also has hardware support for DirectX 6, which was released in early 1999. Back then, a new DirectX version was dropping nearly every year, so not having hardware support for the latest version wasn't a big deal. Games generally maintained backward compatibility with older video cards. To prove this, let's look at Max Payne 2, a DirectX 9 game released in 2003 that actually runs pretty well on our Voodoo 4. Even Half-Life 2 has a DirectX 6 compatible mode, meaning it does run, but let's be real, it doesn't look great, and you'll see plenty of graphical artifacts on certain levels. So far, I think I've covered the Voodoo 4 card better than I did it last time. Back then, I focused more on the M4800 laptop and Windows 98. And speaking of Windows 98, it's not possible to use the Voodoo 4 as the primary video card because the Dell BIOS simply doesn't allow it. While this isn't an issue in Windows XP, it's a big deal in Windows 98, which can use only the Intel HDI GPU. So what if we just swap out that Dell BIOS with something more Voodoo 4 friendly? Can we even do that? Well, I have some exciting news. Thanks to Coreboot and CBIOS, Daniel was finally able to boot with the Voodoo 4 as the primary video card on another Dell M4800. I'm sure I'll be getting my hands on that laptop someday, but for now I only have some pictures that Daniel sent me. The procedure is not exactly very user-friendly. You need physical access to the BIOS chip, and Daniel went with the let's cut the chases approach. From there, it's a matter of manually flashing the firmware, though don't expect everything to work on the first try. Daniel went through multiple rounds of tweaking and reflashing before nailing full functionality. But now the Dell M4800 dual boots Windows XP and Windows 98 under Coreboot, complete with native IDE support in Windows 98. For audio, he's working on a custom Express card solution, though a USB sound card should work in the meantime. It's not the simplest setup, but for a true Windows 98 slash DOS gaming laptop, the effort is worth it, I guess. To be fair, Windows XP is doing a great job when it comes to running older games meant for Windows 9X. I tested a lot of games and there are no major problems. Except we don't have a proper DOS setup for those early exclusive Glide games. Now, before we wrap up, let's take a quick look at the other two Voodoo MXM cards I have. First, the Voodoo 3 M3800. This one shares the same compact 82 by 70 mm form factor as the Voodoo 4, fits perfectly in this Dell M4800 and uses the same Spartan-7 FPGA to handle the digital output. It works flawlessly, but in this video I used my PCIe Voodoo 3 for some comparisons. Next, the big one, the Voodoo 5500. Well, this one features two VSA-100 chips, where VSA stands for Voodoo Scalable Architecture. And yes, it's truly scalable. Each chip has its own memory controller, doubling the memory bandwidth. But that also means a much more complex board, since each chip needs its own RAM, wiring, and dedicated signal lines to stay synchronized. It looks incredible, but right now it's running open air with passive cooling. A proper cooling solution would cost more than the card itself, so getting this fully enclosed in a laptop is going to take a bit more. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you're interested in more technical details, I've written a deeper breakdown on my Patreon page. It's free to read, so feel free to check it out.